Imagine this. It's a warm summer evening in 1994. You stand on the edge of a wooden dock, the air thick with the scent of pine and lake water. The sky is painted in orange and purple streaks as the sun slides beneath the horizon. A father and his young son laugh as they load their fishing rods into a small aluminum boat. They are ordinary people. They live in an ordinary town, and tonight was supposed to be nothing more than an ordinary fishing trip. But by morning, their boat would be found drifting empty. The rod still neatly set, the cooler still unopened, the son's baseball cap still sitting on the seat. No father, no son, no explanation. Now ask yourself, if this happened in your town, on your lake, how would you explain it? Would you call it an accident, a crime, or something no one dares to say out loud? Before we begin, tell me this. Where are you watching from right now? Which country? Which city? Drop it in the comments. I want to know how far this mystery has traveled. And don't forget, subscribe and join us, because tonight we're diving into one of the most chilling unsolved mysteries of the last 3 decades. Some people call it a tragedy. Some call it a cover-up. Others believe it was something far stranger. But one fact remains unshakable. The father and son were never seen again. It was June 18th, 1994. The kind of Saturday that towns like Mill Creek, small, quiet, tucked away in the Midwest, lived for. The air smelled of freshly cut grass, screen doors slammed as kids darted outside, and the faint hum of lawnmowers filled the streets. And in a white house at the corner of Willow Street, a father was preparing for what should have been the simplest of joys, a fishing trip with his son. He was a man of routine, a factory worker who spent long shifts surrounded by the rattle of machines and the sting of oil on his hands. But weekends were different. Weekends meant freedom, and more importantly, weekends meant time with his boy. You picture him now, in his late 30s, strong shoulders, the kind of quiet presence that earned respect without demanding it. He kept his words few, but his actions loud. And tonight his actions said, "This time is for us." The boy was 11, full of questions, full of energy. He idolized his father the way only a son could, believing he could fix anything, lift anything, outsmart anyone. He wore his favorite baseball cap, tilted slightly too big for his head, and carried a fishing rod almost taller than himself. To him, this wasn't just a trip. This was adventure. Inside the kitchen, the father packed sandwiches into a cooler, peanut butter and jelly for the boy, ham and cheese for himself. He dropped in a few sodas, a bag of chips, and 2 chocolate bars. The boy leaned against the counter, impatient, asking if they could bring marshmallows too, just in case they wanted to roast them when they got back. The father smiled. "We won't be gone that long." But those words, casual, ordinary, would later haunt everyone who remembered them. They loaded the boat onto the trailer, tied down with ropes that creaked as the car pulled onto the road. The windows were rolled down, and the warm air carried the scent of honeysuckle. On the radio, a classic rock station played a song about running free, about the road ahead. The boy sang along, off-key but full of enthusiasm. The father drummed, his fingers on the steering wheel. At a gas station, they stopped for ice. The clerk remembered them, the boy laughing, talking about catching the biggest fish the lake had ever seen. His voice carried the unshakable certainty of childhood. No one realized it would be the last time anyone outside their family saw them alive. Lake Ravenwood wasn't famous. It wasn't big. It was just the lake, the kind of place every small town has. The gravel parking lot was nearly empty when they arrived. Only a couple of cars remained, their owners already packing up after a long day in the sun. The father backed the boat down the ramp, the aluminum hull scraping lightly as it slid into the water. The boy climbed in first, balancing with exaggerated care, grinning as if he'd just boarded a ship bound for the unknown. His father handed him a life jacket. He buckled it clumsily. The cooler went in the middle. The rods were set. The engine coughed once, then roared to life. And just like that, they pushed away from the shore. drifting into the open water. Across the lake, a few families still lingered by the shoreline. They watched as the boat grew smaller, two silhouettes outlined by the dying glow of the sunset. Laughter carried faintly over the still water. And then, the boat disappeared into the shadows. The next morning, a local fisherman spotted something unusual, a boat drifting near the reeds, moving gently with the current. At first, he thought, it was just another careless boater who forgot to tie their boat. But as he approached, a knot of unease grew in his stomach. The rods were still propped neatly against the side. The cooler, untouched. The boy's baseball cap rested on the seat. But the boat was empty, no father, no son. The fisherman shouted into the still air, his voice echoing off the trees. No answer. He towed the boat to shore and called the sheriff. By mid-morning, deputies arrived. They scanned the area, searched the mud for footprints, combed the reeds. Nothing. No overturned gear, no signs of a struggle, no evidence they'd even left the boat. It was as if they had simply vanished. By noon, Lake Ravenwood was swarming with people, deputies, volunteers, boats dragging nets through the murky water, divers sinking below the surface with flashlights cutting through the silt. Helicopters circled overhead, their blades chopping the silence into nervous fragments. The entire town gathered at the shoreline. Some brought food for the searchers. Others stood in grim silence, arms crossed, watching. Hope clung to every face. Surely the father and son would be found. Maybe they had swum to shore and gotten lost in the woods. Maybe they were clinging to some hidden bank waiting for help. But as the hours passed, hope thinned. Sheriff Harold Collins had served Mill Creek for over 20 years. He'd seen drownings before. He knew lakes could be merciless. But something about this case unsettled him. The water wasn't deep enough to hide two bodies forever. The divers had combed every inch. Nothing. And then there was the boat. Too neat, too undisturbed. If they had drowned, why wasn't there a sign of struggle? Why was everything in place? Collins stared out over the water, jaw tight. Something was wrong. Back at the house on Willow Street, the boy's mother sat surrounded by neighbors bringing casseroles and pie she couldn't eat. The living room felt suffocating, filled with whispers and pity. She kept glancing at the doorway, half expecting her husband and son to walk through, dripping with lake water, apologizing for scaring everyone. But the door stayed closed, and when night came, the silence in the house was unbearable. In small towns, news spreads like fire. And with news comes rumors. Some said it was a simple drowning. Boats tip, people panic. It happens. But others whispered darker theories. That someone had been waiting on shore. That they'd been abducted. That the lake itself had claimed them. And then came the strangest rumors of all. Stories of light seen hovering over the water that night. Flashes too bright to be lanterns. Too silent to be planes. No one could agree. But no one could explain. On the third day, deputies dragging the northern shore found something tangled in the reeds. A scrap of netting knotted tight around a bow. Metallic fragment. It was small, curved, and stamped with 3 letters and 4 numbers. The code meant nothing to the deputies. But when the fragment was logged into evidence, the FBI would soon arrive, insisting the case was no longer just a local matter. Because 2 weeks later, long after the search was officially called off, a fisherman pulled his net from the Moe Lake and found something chilling. A child's shoe. Inside the sole, wedged deep, was another metallic fragment, stamped with the same code. The discovery of the empty boat was strange enough. The metallic fragment with a code stamped on it was stranger. But what really shook Mill Creek to its core was the silence that followed. Because in towns like this, disappearances usually had answers, but this time no one could find them. On June 25, 1994, exactly 1 week after the father and son vanished, the sheriff's office phone rang. Sheriff Harold Collins answered, expecting another call from a frantic volunteer or desperate family member. Instead, the voice on the other end introduced itself as Special Agent Richard Hale with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. "We're sending a team," the voice said. "Please secure the evidence you've collected and do not release any details to the press." By evening, unmarked black cars rolled into the sheriff's lot. Men in dark suits stepped out, carrying leather, briefcases, and the kind of authority that silences a room. They didn't look like rescuers. They looked like undertakers. The town gathered along Main Street, whispering as the cars passed. Some felt relief. If the FBI's here, they'll solve it. Others felt dread. Why would the FBI care about a simple drowning? The agents set up a command post near Lake Ravenwood. White tents were erected, tables stacked with radios, maps, and files. Photographs of the lake were pinned to corkboards, red string crisscrossing points where evidence had been found. And at the center, under a sheet of plastic, was the metallic fragment pulled from the reeds. 3 letters, 4 numbers, stamped, deep, etched with precision. The local deputies didn't recognize the code, but when Agent Hale saw it, his expression tightened, and he ordered the room cleared. From that moment forward, Mill Creek no longer had control of its own mystery. The first night, the FBI canvassed homes around the lake. Most people had seen nothing, but one man, a retired truck driver who lived alone in a cabin, claimed otherwise. He told agents that around 10 p.m. on June 18th, he had heard a scream, high-pitched, urgent, cut off abruptly, as if swallowed. He stepped onto his porch and scanned the water. At first, he saw only darkness. Then he noticed a light. Not a lantern, not a flashlight. It was white, bright, hovering right above the water. Then it blinked twice and disappeared into the trees. The agents wrote down every word, but later, in private, they labeled his testimony as inconclusive, possible intoxication, because that was easier than admitting what it might have been. But wait, he wasn't the only one. 2 other families camping on the far side of the lake reported strange flashes in the sky that night. One described it as lightning without thunder. The other swore the lights moved in patterns. None of them heard about each other's statements, yet all described the same thing: coincidence or confirmation. Back in town, the boy's mother could barely stand. She hadn't slept since the night they vanished. Neighbors filled her living room, bringing casseroles and pies, murmuring platitudes. She kept staring at the empty hallway, waiting for her son to come barreling through, cap askew, shouting about the fish he caught. Reporters came, cameras flashing, questions flying. She refused them all. "Just bring them back," she whispered again and again, as if anyone had the power to grant it. Days turned to weeks. The FBI combed the area with divers, sonar, and even helicopters fitted with thermal cameras, but nothing surfaced. When reporters asked about the case, officials insisted there were no new leads, yet locals noticed trucks arriving at night, covered loads being driven into the command tent. Deputies were told to stay out. One deputy swore he saw agents unloading something large wrapped in tarps dripping lake water. When he asked what it was, an agent fixed him with a hard stare. "You didn't see anything." By morning, the object was gone. With no answers, theories flourished. The accident theory. They tipped over, drowned, and the bodies sank too deep. But divers had scoured the lake repeatedly. The water wasn't deep enough to hide them. The crime theory. Someone had abducted them. But how, with no footprints, no signs of struggle? The paranormal theory. The lake itself had claimed them. People spoke of older disappearances, of fishermen who swore they lost hours on the water, of campers who heard cries where no one was. No theory satisfied everyone, but every theory made sense to someone. Then came the fisherman. 10 days after the disappearance, a local man cast his net near the northern reeds, the same spot where the fragment was found. When he pulled it back, tangled in the mesh was a child's shoe. Small, muddy. The laces frayed. Inside the sole, pressed deep into the rubber, was another metallic fragment. The same code. The same 3 letters and 4 numbers. The fisherman turned it over to authorities. The FBI logged it in silence. But when the local paper pressed for details, officials denied that anything unusual had been recovered. But wait, why deny it? Why hide it? What did that code mean, and why did it appear twice, once on a scrap of metal, once in a child's shoe? Weeks later, one deputy, unnerved by the secrecy, quietly approached the family. He told them something chilling. The FBI isn't here to find your husband and son, he whispered. They're here because of that code. Whatever it is, it's bigger than this town, bigger than this lake. When asked what the code meant, he shook his head. I don't know. And you don't want to know. Because late that summer, after the official search was declared over, a letter arrived at the local paper. No return address. No explanation. Inside was a single Polaroid. It showed the surface of the lake at night, and in the center, just above, the water, a glowing white light. On the back of the photo, scrawled in pencil, were the same 3 letters and 4 numbers. The code again. But this time, delivered by someone who clearly wanted the world to see. The lake returned to silence. The divers left. The helicopters stopped circling. The volunteers packed up their folding chairs, their coolers, their hopes, and went home. But the absence didn't fade. It lingered in Mill Creek like a storm cloud that never left. Every time someone drove past Lake Ravenwood, they saw the drifting aluminum boat in their mind. They saw the cooler still filled with untouched food. They saw the boy's cap waiting for him to return. And they asked themselves the question no one could answer. Where did they go? The boy's mother refused to accept silence. She stood at the sheriff's office nearly every morning demanding updates. She called FBI hotlines, wrote letters to state senators, pleaded with anyone who would listen. Her grief hardened into determination. They're not gone, she told neighbors. Not the way they say. Something happened, and someone knows more than they're telling. People pitied her at first. Then they feared her anger. Some whispered that she was losing her mind. Others whispered that she might be the only one who saw the truth. Sheriff Collins hadn't slept properly since June. On his desk sat the reports, every search log, every diver's note, every statement. None of them added up. He flipped again to the page describing the fragment pulled from the reeds. 3 letters, 4 numbers. He'd written them down a dozen times, hoping they would make sense. But they didn't. And when he pressed the FBI, agents for answers, they gave him the same reply. Need to know, Sheriff, and you don't need to know. He wanted to protest. But when the federal government told you to stand down, you stood down, even if it meant betraying your town. But, wait, there was someone who wouldn't stand down. 2 months later, a fisherman named Walter approached the sheriff privately. His hands shook as he spoke, his voice trembling with the weight of memory. He swore that on the night of June 18th, he had been fishing near the northern cove. The water was calm, the air heavy. Around 10:15 p.m., he saw the aluminum boat drifting, not fast, just slowly, like it was being guided. He thought it strange, but stranger still was what came next. A flash of light. Blinding. White. Hovering just above the waterline. He swore he saw figures standing in the boat, 2 shadows, then gone in the light. When he blinked, the boat was empty. He'd told no one, until now afraid people would call him crazy, but his story echoed the truck drivers, echoed the campers, echoed the photograph that arrived at the paper. When the sheriff relayed Walter's testimony, the FBI dismissed it. Unreliable witness, possible hallucination. But in private, the agents typed up a full report. They added it to a file labeled Ravenwood Incident, Restricted. And then, they locked it away. The more the town searched for answers, the more questions surfaced, not just about the night of the disappearance, but about the father himself. He wasn't a troublemaker. He wasn't rich. He wasn't tied to any scandal. He was ordinary, but buried in his work records was something unusual. For 3 months in 1989, he had taken a leave of absence. No one knew why. No one remembered where he had gone. When asked, he had simply said, "Needed time." But in a town where every life was an open book, those missing pages now glared like red flags. Had something from his past finally caught up with him? Or was it nothing more than coincidence? Weeks later, the boy's school belongings were returned to his mother. Among them was a notebook, doodles, math problems, half-finished sentences. But on one page, scrawled in messy handwriting, were the words, "Dad says there's something strange about the lake. Something no one talks about." Below it, a sketch of waves, and inside the waves, a circle with lines radiating outward, like a light shining from beneath the surface. But wait, why would a father tell his son something like that? In September 1994, a local radio hobbyist named Frank picked up something unusual on his shortwave. A burst of static, then faintly, voices. One male, one young. They were indistinct, broken by interference, but fragments could be heard. "Hold on. I can't. Help me." The voices cut, replaced by silence. Frank swore it sounded like a father and son. He brought the tape to the sheriff, who in turn passed it to the FBI. By morning, the tape was gone, and Frank swore he saw men in suits leaving his property that night. By winter, grief had consumed the boy's mother. She stopped eating. She stopped speaking to neighbors. But she confided in one close friend something chilling. "I dream of them," she said. "I see them on the boat, calling for me. The water is so black, and then the light comes. And when I reach out, they vanish. Dreams, perhaps, or something more." By the end of 1994, the case was officially dormant. The FBI closed their temporary office. The sheriff filed the reports, but the lake never let the town forget. Every time the wind rippled its surface, people imagined voices. Every time lightning flashed, they imagined the light. And for nearly 3 decades, the mystery slept beneath the water. Until the summer of 2022, a local fisherman pulled his net from the northern cove. Inside was something slick, metallic, entangled in weeds. At first, he thought it was junk, but when he cleaned it, he froze. Because stamped into it, just like before, were the same 3 letters and 4 numbers. And this time, it wasn't just a fragment. It was part of a larger object, something unmistakable, a piece of the boat that should never have been missing. For nearly 3 decades, the town of Mill Creek had lived in uneasy silence. People avoided the subject of the lake. Parents warned children to stay away from it after dark. Fishermen whispered about strange currents that tugged at their nets. But still, no one dared to speak too loudly about what had happened on that summer night in 1994. Then, in June 2022, silence shattered. It was early morning. A fisherman named Carlos, a lifelong resident of Mill Creek, cast his net into the northern cove of Lake Ravenwood, the same place where the boy's shoe had been found nearly 30 years before. The water rippled. The net sank, and when he hauled it back, something heavy tugged at his hands. At first, he thought it was a log, tangled in weeds. But as he pulled, the outline sharpened into something metallic, curved, slick with algae. He dragged it onto his boat, heart pounding. It was a fragment of aluminum, rusted, waterlogged, but unmistakable, and stamped across its surface, faded but legible, were the same 3 letters and 4 numbers. The code that had haunted Mill Creek for decades. By afternoon, word spread. A crowd gathered at the docks, murmuring, snapping photos with their phones. Older residents shook their heads in disbelief. Younger ones, who had only heard the story as legend, now saw proof with their own eyes. "It's real," one man whispered. It was always real. The sheriff's office, now under new leadership, seized the fragment. Reporters swarmed. For the first time in years, Lake Ravenwood wasn't just a quiet fishing spot. It was the center of a storm. Within 48 hours, the black cars were back. The FBI had returned. They shut down the northern cove, cordoned off the docks, and moved their command post into a warehouse near the shore. Locals who tried to peek inside saw crates stacked high, men in gloves and masks hauling equipment. When asked, officials gave the same statement they had in 1994. No further comment at this time. But people remembered. People remembered the secrecy, the trucks, the tarps, the silence, and once again, whispers spread like wildfire. The current sheriff, a woman named Lisa Monroe, wasn't like Collins before her. She had grown up in Mill Creek, had been a teenager when the father and son vanished. She remembered the fear, the unanswered questions, and she was determined not to let history repeat. When the FBI locked down the evidence, she pushed back. She demanded transparency. She filed official complaints, but every door slammed in her face. Then one night, an anonymous package arrived at her office. Inside was a single envelope containing photographs. The pictures showed the metallic fragment Carlos had pulled from the lake. But in these photos, the fragment was attached to something larger, a jagged piece of aluminum hull. Stamped clearly on its side was not just the code, but also a partial serial number of a boat, not the fishing boat from 1994, something else. But wait, if the fragment wasn't from the father and son's boat, then what was it from? Gabriel Duarte, the reporter who vanished in 1988, had become almost a myth in town lore. But in 2022, another journalist arrived, his niece Isabella, determined to finish the work her uncle had started. She knocked on doors, interviewed old witnesses, dug through archives, and she uncovered something chilling. Between 1989 and 1995, at least 6 other disappearances had occurred within a 50-mile radius of Lake Ravenwood. A hunter, 2 hikers, a couple on a road trip. None of them ever found. Each case had been quietly filed away, overshadowed by bigger headlines, and in one of the reports, scribbled in the margin, was a single note. Possible connection. Ravenwood. Same pattern. Walter, the fisherman, who had once confessed to seeing figures vanish in the boat, was an old man now. When Isabella found him, he was nearly blind, his voice raspy. But when she asked about that night, his memory sharpened. I told them what I saw, he said. They left, said I'd been drinking. He gripped her hand. But I wasn't drunk. I saw the light. I saw them vanish. And I saw something else. He leaned closer, his voice a whisper. There was another boat. Bigger, black. No lights, watching from the cove. Isabella's reporting didn't go unnoticed. One night, as she left the diner where she'd been interviewing locals, a man in a suit approached her. His voice was low, calm, but carried weight. Stop digging, he said. You're chasing something you can't handle. Some mysteries are safer unsolved. He handed her a card. No name, no number. Just the same 3 letters and 4 numbers. And then he walked away. But wait, if the FBI really wanted silence, why leave the code? Unless it wasn't a warning. It was a breadcrumb. The boy's mother was older now, her hair gray, her body frail. But when Isabella visited her, she still kept her son's cap on the mantel, dusted daily as if he might return to wear it. I still dream of them, she said softly. Every night. They're calling to me. Their voices echo across the water. But when I reach for them, the light takes them away. She clutched Isabella's hand. It wasn't the lake that took them. It was something in the sky. Around the same time, a physicist from a nearby university came forward. Dr. Alan Perkins had studied unusual atmospheric readings from June 1994. That night, he explained, there was a geomagnetic storm, rare, powerful, enough to scramble compasses and distort signals. In certain conditions, such storms can create phenomena we barely understand. Lights in the sky, distortions in time perception. He paused. But it doesn't explain the fragments, or the code. 2 weeks. Later, another net was pulled from Lake Ravenwood. Inside was not a fragment, not a shoe, but a sealed container. When officials opened it under heavy guard, what they found made even hardened agents pale. Inside, wrapped in rotting canvas, was a fishing rod, the boy's fishing rod, and taped to its handle, smeared with algae and dirt, was a photograph. A photograph showing the father and son, sitting in their boat, eyes wide, as if staring at something just beyond the camera. On the back of the photo was the code, written in the boy's handwriting. The discovery of the boy's fishing rod with that haunting photograph taped to it lit a fire under Mill Creek. For weeks, it was all anyone talked about. In the grocery store aisles, at church on Sunday, whispered over backyard fences. The photograph was proof, not just of their existence, but of their final terrifying moments. And the writing on the back, 3 letters and 4 numbers, scrawled in the boy's uneven hand, was the cruelest echo of all. The image was grainy, water-damaged but unmistakable. The father sat at the stern, jaw clenched, his arm half extended as if shielding his son. The boy sat in the center, his eyes wide, mouth open, staring at something beyond the frame. But what froze everyone was the background. The water around the boat wasn't calm. It was disturbed, rippling in tight, concentric circles as though something beneath the surface was rising, and above the boy's head, faint but visible, was a glow. Not the sun, not lightning, something else. Reporters demanded answers. The town demanded transparency. But the FBI stood at the podium and declared the photo a hoax. Fabricated, they said. Not authentic. The crowd erupted. People shouted. Some even laughed bitterly, because they all knew the same thing. The photo had been found in the lake itself, sealed in a container with the boy's rod. It couldn't have been faked, unless, of course, the fakers were the very ones making the accusation. Isabella Duarte refused to let go. Her uncle had vanished, chasing the truth, and now she understood why. She tracked down retired deputies, sifted through boxes of old evidence, requested files through the Freedom of Information Act. Most of her requests came back stamped, denied in the interest of national security. National security. For a father and son who went fishing, it made no sense, which meant it made all the sense in the world. But wait. When Isabella finally got one document through, what she found shocked her. The report was from July 1994. It mentioned unidentified airborne activity logged on radar near Lake Ravenwood on the very night the father and son vanished. Entire paragraphs were blacked out. Names were erased. Coordinates were hidden. But one line slipped through. Joint retrieval operations to proceed under Project Seraphim. Isabella circled the words, her heart pounding. Project Seraphim. She scoured databases, archives, declassified Cold War files. Nothing. Not a single mention. Whatever Seraphim was, it wasn't meant to be known. Through her digging, Isabella tracked down a retired federal agent who agreed to meet under the condition his name never be printed. They sat in a diner booth, coffee between them. His eyes never stopped scanning the door. "You want the truth?" he asked. "The truth is, Ravenwood wasn't an accident, it was an incident, and it wasn't the only one." He leaned in closer. Central Africa, the Arctic, out at sea, same story. Vessels vanish, sometimes they come back, sometimes they don't. When they do, they're different. Different how? Isabella pressed. The man's hands shook. "You don't want to know." "I wish I didn't." He stood abruptly, threw a few bills on the table, and left without another word. Meanwhile, the boy's mother continued to deteriorate. Age and grief had hollowed her, but when Isabella visited, she was lucid, her eyes burning with conviction. "They never left," she whispered. "They're still here. I hear them in the walls. I see them in the water. They're waiting for me." She clutched Isabella's wrist. "Don't let them vanish too. Don't let them bury this." That summer, a local radio hobbyist once again picked up strange signals on his shortwave. Static, cracks. And then, for just a few seconds, a voice. A man's voice. Calm, professional. "This is Ravenwood Flight requesting clearance." "Fuel low." The man froze. Because Ravenwood wasn't a flight. It was a lake. He recorded the signal and sent it to Isabella. She replayed it again and again, her skin crawling. The cadence was wrong for a fishing trip. It was a pilot's cadence. But from where? But wait. Days later, another signal followed. This time, the voice was different, younger, weaker, almost trembling. We're still here. Then static swallowed the rest. Isabella sat in her apartment, headphones pressed tight, hands shaking. She knew that voice. It was the boys. Following a tip, Isabella discovered that the FBI had once rented a storage unit just outside Mill Creek in the late 90s. The lease had long expired, but the owner remembered boxes stacked high, men in suits loading them at night. Inside, after years of abandonment, only scraps remained. But among them was a logbook. Water damaged. Half illegible. One entry, though, was clear. Recovered debris. Classified. Under seraphim. Not to be disclosed. And beneath it, faintly scrawled in pencil, "They are not gone. They are kept." In December 2022, the boy's mother passed away. At her funeral, Isabella noticed something strange. A man in a dark suit stood at the back, not speaking to anyone, not joining the procession. When she turned to look again, he was gone. Later, when she checked her coat pocket, she found a folded piece of paper. On it, in block letters, was the same code. No explanation, no signature, just the code. And then, in early 2023, a construction crew working on the outskirts of town stumbled upon something buried deep in the soil near Ravenwood's northern cove. At first, they thought it was scrap metal. But as they unearthed more, the shape took form. It wasn't from a boat. It wasn't from a car. It was a fuselage, part of an aircraft, and stamped along its side, rusted but visible, was the same emblem seen in the boy's photograph. The river bird, but there had never been a plane at Ravenwood, so whose wreckage was this? The discovery of a fuselage fragment buried near Ravenwood should have been impossible. No plane had ever been reported missing in the area. No flight paths crossed there. No wreckage had been logged. And yet, there it was. Half buried, rusted, with the faint outline of a riverbird emblem. For the people of Mill Creek, the question was no longer, what happened to the father and son? It was, what kind of place are we living beside? Old stories resurfaced, stories most had, dismissed as drunken tales or local superstition. Fishermen who claimed to lose hours on the water, their watches skipping forward without explanation. Campers who swore they heard voices at night, whispers carried across the lake when no one else was there. Hunters who found their compasses spinning, needles refusing to settle. For decades, people had called them exaggerations. Now they wondered if they had been warnings. Isabella traveled beyond Mill Creek into a small native community that had lived along Ravenwood's waters for centuries. There she met an elder named Tupan. When she asked about the lake, he shook his head. "You call it Ravenwood," he said. "We called it something else, the water that remembers." She asked him why. He leaned forward, his voice a whisper. "Because sometimes the water gives back what it takes, but not as it was, changed, different, wrong." He told her of hunters who disappeared in the 1800s only to reappear weeks later. Silent, pale, eyes blank, unable to speak. "Doors open here," he said. "Not for us. For them. And sometimes, people are taken." At the same time, Dr. Alan Perkins, the physicist who had studied the 1994 geomagnetic storm, returned to Isabella with new data. He pulled up charts, graphs, atmospheric records. On June 18, 1994, the ionosphere above this region was unstable, distorted. The kind of distortion that bends signals, even radar. Planes can vanish from screens during these events. But that's not all, he continued. The same anomaly occurred again in June 2022, right when the fisherman found the fragment. He leaned in, his voice grave. "It's not random. It's a cycle. Something about this place opens every 28 years. But wait, if it was a cycle, then it wasn't over. Even in death, the boy's mother seemed to linger in the town. Neighbors whispered about her house, about how after her passing, strange sounds filled its empty halls, footsteps, doors closing, the faint laughter of a child. When Isabella stayed the night there, she swore she heard voices, a man's deep, steady tone, a boy's excited chatter. She followed the sounds into the kitchen. The cap still on the mantel seemed to glow in the moonlight. And then for just a moment she saw them. The father at the counter, packing the cooler, the boy tugging at his sleeve. A replay of the last night. Then the vision dissolved, leaving only silence. That summer, residents around Ravenwood began reporting strange lights again. At first, small flickers, then larger flashes. Hovering spheres drifting silently across. The water blinking in patterns. Phone videos captured them, though skeptics dismissed them as drones. But one video, filmed by a teenager, showed something impossible. The lights formed shapes. 3 letters, 4 numbers. The code. Now, the town split into camps. The cover-up theory. The FBI knew what happened in 1994 and hid it. The code was part of a military program. The paranormal theory, Ravenwood was a thin place, a doorway to somewhere else, and the father and son had been pulled through. The hybrid theory, the government didn't cause it, but they knew about it, and they were studying it, not stopping it. Every theory was terrifying. None brought comfort. But wait, there was still one piece missing. Someone else had seen what happened that night. Through old police logs, Isabella found a name she hadn't seen before. A camper interviewed briefly in 1994, then dismissed as unreliable. His name was Henry Cole. When she tracked him down, he was living alone in a trailer, gray-haired, eyes hollow. At first he refused to talk. Then he poured a drink and began. "I was in the woods that night," he said. "I saw the boat, I saw the light, and I saw them rise." "Rise?" Isabella pressed. He nodded, tears brimming. They weren't taken into the water. They were lifted up into the light, and then they were gone. He buried his face in his hands. "No one believed me. They said I was drunk. But I know what I saw." When Isabella tried to verify Henry's statement, she went back to the old police logs. But his name was gone. The page torn, the record erased, as if he had never been interviewed at all. And then, in August 2023, it happened again. A family boating near the northern cove reported losing 3 hours. They remembered casting their lines at dusk. The next thing they knew, it was full night, their watches spinning forward. When they returned to shore, shaken, they found something lodged in their boat's floorboards, a scrap of aluminum. Stamped, with the code, and this time fresh, untarnished, as if it had just been made. The discovery of fresh metal fragments in 2023 should have reignited the official investigation. But instead of answers, Mill Creek was met with silence. The FBI returned, again in black cars, again with briefcases, again with curt statements. No comment at this time. It was the same script from 1994, but this time people weren't willing to accept it. Through her digging, Isabella uncovered a whisper of a name she had seen before. Project Seraphim. It appeared in half-redacted documents, in scribbled notes, passed anonymously, in the hushed warnings of retired officials. Always the same name. Always tied to unexplained vanishings. When she pressed one contact, a former intelligence analyst, he told her something chilling. Seraphim isn't about planes or boats. It's about thresholds, places where the world bends. Ravenwood is one of them. There are others. Africa, Siberia, the Pacific. She asked him what the goal was. His face darkened. Containment, not rescue. Digging deeper, Isabella pieced together disappearances that had never been connected before. 1957, Siberia. A mining crew of 12 vanished. Their equipment was later found twisted, melted, as if exposed to impossible heat. 1969, Pacific Ocean. A submarine surfaced empty, every hatch sealed from the inside. 1983, Nevada. An entire motel wing vanished overnight. Rooms, guests, and furniture, leaving only a concrete foundation. Each case had one thing in common: the code, scribbled in margins, etched in recovered fragments, whispered by survivors, who were ignored. In one of her anonymous packages, Isabella found a photocopy of a CIA memo dated 1994. It read, "Ravenwood confirmed. Subject vessel sealed. Indefinite isolation recommended. Disclosure unacceptable." At the bottom, handwritten in blue ink, were 5 words: "They are not gone. Kept." The same phrasing she had seen before: not lost, not dead. Kept. But wait. Kept. Where? And by whom? By autumn 2023, Isabella began receiving encrypted emails from someone claiming to be a former Brazilian intelligence officer. The messages were brief, disjointed, but one contained a photograph, a runway in the Amazon, 1987. Crates stacked high, a tarp covering what looked like a section of fuselage. The officer wrote, "Seraphim was joint. Not just US Brazil helped. Others too. Disappearances, not accidents. Controlled extractions. Controlled." The word burned in Isabella's mind. If true, then the father and son hadn't been victims of chance. They had been chosen. One evening, after visiting the boy's mother's grave, Isabella noticed a man standing at a distance, dressed in gray, hat low. He didn't approach, didn't speak. When she turned to leave, she found an envelope tucked under her car's windshield wiper. Inside was a single page, a list of names. Not just the father and son, but dozens of others, missing persons from across the globe. Each with dates, each with locations, each marked with the same code. And beside the father and son's entry, one more word had been added in ink: active. Through persistent digging, Isabella convinced a retired FBI agent to talk. He agreed only in whispers, meeting her in a dimly lit motel room. His hand shook as he lit a cigarette. We weren't told much, just that Ravenwood had to stay quiet. That recovery wasn't an option. She asked him why. He exhaled smoke, eyes haunted. Because it wasn't ours to recover. Whatever took them, whatever holds them, it doesn't let go. And if it does, it won't be the same. When she pressed for more, he slammed his fist against the table. You don't understand. Seraphim isn't about saving lives. It's about protecting the rest of us from what comes back. But wait. What could possibly come back? In November 2023, Isabella received another tape from her anonymous source. The audio was degraded, but a transcript was included. The voices were frantic. Multiple speakers. The words chilling. Containment breached. They're not responding. Shut it down now. Then static. But one final phrase pierced through, clear and calm. This is Ravenwood Unit, requesting clearance. Weeks later, the boy's old home, abandoned since his mother's death, caught fire. Neighbors swore they saw no one enter, swore they heard voices inside shouting, calling for help. But when firefighters arrived, the house was already engulfed. In the rubble, investigators found something strange. A charred scrap of paper, edges blackened. On it, the code, and below it, scrawled in a child's hand, "Help us." Then, on a cold December night, Isabella herself received a call. The number was blocked. The voice was distorted, mechanical. "You think you're chasing answers," it said, "but you're chasing a door, and some doors should never be opened." Before she could reply, the voice spoke once more. "They are still inside, but not for long." The line went dead, and on her phone screen, glowing faintly, were 3 letters and 4 numbers. The code again, but this time, it appeared without being dialed. For nearly 3 decades, the mystery of Ravenwood was a wound that never closed. But now, with fragments surfacing, files leaking, and whispers of Project Seraphim echoing across continents, one thing became terrifyingly clear. This was never just about a father and son. It was about a door that should never have been opened. Isabella pinned a map across her motel wall. Dots spread across it like scars. Ravenwood, Siberia, the Pacific, the Nevada desert. She drew lines between them and something horrifying emerged. They weren't random. They formed a pattern, a corridor stretching across the globe, places where reality seemed thin, where vanishings multiplied, and Ravenwood sat squarely at its heart. Dr. Perkins returned with one last analysis. He showed Isabella data stretching back decades, geomagnetic storms, ionospheric anomalies, unexplained signal disruptions. Every 28 years, he said, pointing to the cycles. Something opens, not everywhere, just in certain places. Ravenwood is one of them. She asked him what lay beyond. He hesitated, then whispered, another layer. Not heaven, not hell, just elsewhere. And when people cross, they don't always come back the same. On a foggy November night, Isabella stood at Ravenwood's northern cove. The air was electric, the water restless. And then she saw it, the aluminum boat. Not now, but then, frozen in time. The father at the stern, shielding his son. The boy, clutching his rod. They were there, yet not there, like a projection bleeding through, and above them the light. Blinding. Terrifying. Her recorder caught only static. But her eyes caught what she could never forget. The boy turning, looking straight at her, mouth forming 2 words, help us. Then the vision dissolved. But wait, was it vision or memory bleeding through? A new leak revealed blueprints of a containment facility, supposedly constructed in 1995 near Ravenwood. Rows of labs, holding chambers, isolation rooms, not built to rescue, built to imprison. The annotation at the bottom, indefinite observation, no contact permitted, Seraphim, protocol. If the father and son were taken, they weren't just lost, they were being held. Through a final anonymous drop, Isabella received a VHS tape, grainy, poorly lit. On it, a man in uniform sat at a table, face blurred. This is my last testimony, he said. Seraphim was real. Ravenwood was real. We saw them, alive, but not alive. He rubbed his eyes, voice cracking. They looked at us, but it wasn't them anymore. Something else stared back. That's why we sealed it. Not to save them, to protect us. He slammed his fist on the table. Don't open it again, don't. The tape cut to static. Sheriff Monroe stood torn between duty and truth. Her town deserved answers, but the government made it clear, silence or ruin. Late one night, she drove to the lake, stood at the shore. The water was calm, deceptively calm, and then the ripples came, circles spreading outward, glowing faintly. She swore she heard voices, a man's, a boy's, calling her name. On December 28, 2023, emergency scanners picked up a signal near Ravenwood static. Then, a male voice. Calm. Professional. This is Ravenwood unit, requesting clearance, fuel low. Seconds later, a younger voice. We're still here. The transmission cut, and every radar screen went dark. So what really happened at Ravenwood? Did a father and son fall victim to a tragic accident, lost to the lake forever? Did the government conceal a Cold War? Experiment trapping them in something never meant to exist, or did they cross a threshold, pulled into a world we cannot understand, kept not by choice but by design? And if that's true, then ask yourself, was this a tragedy of nature? A secret cover-up? Or the opening of a door never meant for us? Because sometimes the most haunting mysteries aren't about what was lost. They're about what refuses to return. What do you think happened that night on Lake Ravenwood? Was it a simple accident? A government conspiracy? or something from beyond our understanding? Share your theory in the comments below, because some stories were never meant to stay buried. Don't let them vanish. Keep them alive with us.